Fringe Radio, your trusted source for the paranormal, conspiracy theory, and true crime.
From the Mistopheles Studios, it's Dark Fringe Radio.
Recent headlines tell the story. The U.S. government now acknowledges that UFOs are real, and more, that a secretive Pentagon task force actively investigated sightings and encounters at a time when the government was publicly debunking the phenomenon and ridiculing witnesses. I'm Keith Thompson, and the title of my new book is The UFO Paradox, the celestial and symbolic world of unidentified aerial phenomena. I was 12 when I first heard of UFOs. It was my turn to give a classroom current events report. I chose this topic. After decades on this journalistic beat, I've concluded UFOs are decidedly real. Indeed, the phenomenon comprises a hyper-presence that spans the entire globe, very likely preceding the sliver of memory we call human history. In case after case, a familiar impasse is reached. Compelling first-hand testimony from credible witnesses on one side, disparaging responses from various authorities on the other. In the fertile void of this stalemate, extraordinary possibilities about the nature of mind and matter and our untapped evolutionary potential enter the debate. The UFO brings many of our cherished identities, national, ethnic, religious, into question. In the UFO Paradox, I show how our long-term engagement with this phenomenon displays key features of an initiatory process, a collective rite of passage that shapes beliefs and expectations in remarkable ways. Ultimately, the UFO-UAP phenomenon represents a call from the cosmos for humanity to open to greater dimensions of reality and to recognize that our understanding of the universe and our place in it is far from complete.
Welcome everybody to Dark Fringe Radio. I am your host, Will Martinez, and tonight we have a very interesting guest. His name is Keith Thompson. He is an author, independent journalist, talk radio host, former TV talk show host, and a former U.S. Senate staff member. This is actually the first time we've actually had somebody of that caliber here on our podcast. But his articles have appeared in the New York Times, Esquire, San Francisco Chronicle, Idaho Statesman, and the Pacific Sun. He lives in North Florida, and he's here to promote his new book, The UFO Paradox. Please welcome Keith Thompson. How are you, Keith?
Will, it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Likewise. And you did a phenomenal job with this book. I was able to, get my hands on it and get into it in depth. And I really found it refreshing. And this all started with a sixth grade class, project. This is where it all started?
Yeah, I'm happy to get right into that. My first I became a journalist. It was my first journalistic assignment, you might say. It was my turn to give a current events report in class. What that meant in sixth grade, age 12, was that you would take a story in the news and you clip clippings from those things called newspapers, which we used to get thrown up on the driveway, and that was our main source of news, and TV. So I had no orientation to the UFO phenomenon. I was not a big Star Trek follower, Star Wars follower. I wasn't a big sci-fi, science fiction guy. No disparagement of any of those, but I didn't come at it from that. I was more drawn to the way the debate about these things unfolds. So briefly, let me simply say, I was growing up in Northwest Ohio. I chose a UFO sighting in Michigan, central Michigan, that had been going on for 3 or 4 days. It's one of those big cases. It even made it onto the national news, in particular CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. He actually began the evening news at least one night during this UFO flap by making that the lead story. Can you imagine in today's news if a UFO event were the major opening of the news? So I reported on this in my class, and I won't go into detail really about what the particular case was about, except that it had the main elements of ordinary people from various walks of life reporting extraordinary phenomena that they could not identify, and the phenomena behaved extraordinarily. It was ordinary people reporting extraordinary phenomena. And I noticed right off the bat the response of the various, what I call agents of official culture in science and media and academia, would be called in as expert witnesses. The witnesses themselves were okay, but we want to get expert witnesses to comment on them. And invariably they would explain it away. They were often presented as fair-minded skeptics. But I quickly realized that they were really playing the role of what later became known as debunkers. Their job was to explain it away, make it go away, in effect. Now, there are honest skeptics in this field, and they ask hard questions. I consider myself a skeptic, meaning if someone makes a claim, I want to know how they know about it. Would I be able to verify that for myself? That's not an attempt to debunk what they're saying. It's to help me learn how I could figure this out on my own. Is there anybody else who saw it too? So I talked about it in my class, and at the end of my report, the teacher came forward and said, I think what Keith is telling us, I had taken some questions from my classmates, like, what do you think they saw? And do you think it's from outer space? Asking for interpretations. And I simply said, well, the interpretation has to come second. It's what people report. It's the observations we've got to hold on to and see if we can make sense of them later. And my teacher came up and said, what I think Keith is trying to tell us with his fine report, she really liked what I did. She said that we should keep an open mind and ask relevant questions. And then she turned to me, standing right next to me in front of the class, and often as teachers do, she said, Mr. Thompson, that was a fine report. You have the makings of a journalist or a scientist or maybe a detective. She put those three together. And she goes, great job. And then she said, follow the evidence wherever it leads. I can tell you, I write about this in the book. It was like a benediction, like a blessing for a young person who was front of the class and, trying to do my best and was inspired by news media. And I saw myself as kind of a cub reporter. I probably took it more seriously than many of my classmates who often gave just enough to get by. But I was quite interested in the whole story. So I didn't at that day decide to become a UFO researcher. Instead, I went out right after class and went to the playground, and it was recess time. I got to be a 12-year-old again. So by no means did I focus on this full time. But I did come away from that with a real sense of good work. You did the job. And by the way, the connection between a scientist, a journalist, and a detective, all of them look for clues. A good scientist doesn't say, well, this data doesn't fit, let's exclude it. No, this data doesn't fit the rest of the pattern. Maybe it's a broader pattern, right? That's how an honest scientist does, unless they're doing propaganda. A detective doesn't say, well, somebody killed the guy who lives in the big house on the hill. I happen to like the butler, so I'm going to exclude him. Well, that's fine if you're trying to protect your buddy, but that's not how you solve a crime. Doesn't mean the butler did it, but you don't rule him out of bounds in advance. And the same with journalism. Sure, there's a lot of biased journalism for sure, especially these days when it comes to politics. But the point of a journalist is to present multiple sides and maybe leave the question open. So I came away from that with a sort of pat on the back and a sense that I could continue. And I did. I continued to pay attention to this phenomenon and wrote a previous book called Angels and Aliens, which is now out of print, and have continued to track it. And here I am with my latest work.
Yeah, absolutely. And the UFO Paradox, I mean, great work. And before we get into it, the UFO phenomenon itself, right? It's something that it's been going on for, hundreds of years, really, even maybe further. With some of the paintings that we've seen, and medieval paintings with objects in the sky and people pointing to it. It goes on so far. How does people's religion kind of fit into this whole UFO, phenomena paradox? How does that fit into this whole thing?
Well, my friend Professor Jeffrey Kripal at Rice University says if it is your fate to get involved in studying he's a religion scholar, by the way, at Rice, and he said if it's your fate to get interested in this phenomenon and to track it, you'll find it opens up to everything, namely the anomaly that this is, this phenomenon which crosses the divide between the mental and the physical in a way that's not supposed to happen. The mind and matter are considered a part of a duality, dualistic thing. They're not supposed to communicate, so I'm not supposed to be able to read your thoughts. I'm not picking up any of your thoughts right now, so don't worry, your secrets are safe with me. But I happen to believe the evidence is strong, including laboratory scientific evidence that paranormal phenomena do exist. So what has been the role in these with these phenomena in terms of the development of our religion is a big question. What was Ezekiel's wheel in the Old Testament? What was the wheel? What was the burning bush that Moses saw? These are religious miracles. It does not mean to say that what we call UFOs today, and we think are flying saucers, and many believe must be extraterrestrial. That happens to be just one interpretation, by the way, because it could be entirely different, but real, something that doesn't fit our framework. It doesn't mean that the figures of the Bible saw UFOs, let alone flying saucers. They had miraculous, if you will, phenomena that took them right up to the edge of their reality, and they became part of our religious lore. So, it is very, very likely, in a fundamental way, there is a sense in which the UFO debate ultimately resembles religious arguments.
Yes, it does.
Including the search for especially in the disclosure wing of the UFO movement, the current disclosure. The government has the answers, and we're getting to the heart of it, and soon we'll have all the answers, and so forth. That has echoes of, the return of Jesus. When will Jesus return? And now and I don't mean that to be glib to either religious people or UFO people, UFO researchers, but there's a common structure to religious prophecy and the endless prophecy that the final solution to the UFO mystery is just about to come. But it never really does quite come in those terms.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned Jeffrey Kripal and, mentioned him as an influence in this book. There was a few other people that you mentioned in this book. Could you further elaborate on some of those people? I think it was like Alan Watts you talked about, some of the things that he said. And it was one quote that I found here. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Was from Ken Arnold, and he was talking about the creation myth.
Well, I talk about it as a creation myth. Yeah. So here's the deal.
Okay.
1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying near Mount Rainier in the state of Washington. He was looking for a downed airplane. So that was his job. And he was a very skilled private pilot. Very experienced. He saw 9 objects approaching at a rapid speed, flying in formation. And he called it in and said, is there anything on your, at the tower, are you getting anything on your radar? And he said, no. He said, well, they are skipping the way a saucer would skip over water. By the time that got translated to the local news media, who were listening in on the frequency, they met him at the airport when he landed. Said, you reporting flying saucers? So that's what it was described that in the what I call the origin myth, the originating myth, just as in a traditional culture, a primal indigenous culture, the myth of the people, of that people is taught to the young men and the young women. as part of their initiation into the community, to know this is who we are. This is who our ancestors were. By the way, very often the ancestors do come from the sky in indigenous cultures.
Right.
And religion, the myths of religion very often do. There are beings from the sky that land and interact with human beings. It's a very common motif. So what was interesting about the Arnold sighting, in addition to the confusion about whether these were shaped like saucers or whether they simply move like saucers, it led to the beginning of sightings around 1947. And so the modern age of the flying saucer was born. Now, what's interesting is after his death, his daughter came forward and said, my father was always pretty much perplexed by the idea that what he reported that day was extraterrestrial craft made of metal, nuts and bolts. It was nothing of the kind. My father said that these beings seemed to shimmer. They were translucent, blue and white, and they seemed to beat almost with the rhythm of the human heart. He didn't describe them as living in a strict sense, but that they were translucent and opaque, moving back and forth in their densities, and they did have the beat of the human heart, and metaphorically speaking. And then she added that her father had said he thought his impression, his very strong intuition that day was that these events, these objects in the sky, call them craft, were from another dimension, from another reality. Not from necessarily from outer space or another galaxy, but from another reality that he felt was actually close to where we go after we die, to another realm, the afterworld, the afterlife, where the soul, matters of the soul. Now, that was not how the story was told at the time, because it was already, for Kenneth Arnold, it was already a big enough stretch that he was associated with flying saucers. He probably understood that if he had reported that he'd seen the craft that suggested to him where we go after we die, another dimension, he might have had to pass a psychiatric test just to keep his pilots.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to think about if that had been the report, if that had been the originating story, then we would not have been talking about, perhaps, extraterrestrial craft. We would have been talking about this as a phenomenon related to some of the deepest mysteries of esoteric spirituality. So that is one of the things I write about in the book. It's not still widely known, but the founding myth of the UFO phenomenon is continuing to change right before our eyes with these new details.
Yeah, every day we're starting to see more and more stuff. I mean, how long ago was it? I think it was 5 or 6 months ago where we had that, I think it was a string of 3 different UFOs that were shot down, and one in Alaska, one in Michigan supposedly, and another one somewhere other place. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but why do you think we're seeing all these things happening more and more out in the open?
Well, I think part of it, Will, is that we are seeing a greater willingness to report them. There's a deep stigma associated with this. You may remember in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the opening scene, it's an air traffic control tower, and the air traffic control director is standing over looking at the radar with 2 or 3 other guys sitting down, and he's standing over them, maybe with his hands on their shoulders. And there are 3 airlines, maybe TWA, United, and Pan Am, each of which is observing some kind of something in the sky that doesn't seem to belong there, an unusual craft that is not on the flight plan of any of these airlines. And the air traffic control can't explain it either. So a time comes after the back and forth when the air traffic control director says to each of the pilots, Pan Am 642, do you wish to report a UFO? And there's a silence. He asks him again, Pan Am, do you wish to report a UFO? Negative. United. Negative. TWA. He said negative, then he added, I wouldn't know what to report. And the air traffic controller said, understood. Neither do I. So those pilots understood, if only intuitively, that if they were to have endorsed, if they had reported, this, it would have made it into the media, and very likely the media would have been on their doorsteps, found out who they were and where they lived, and would have been after them to do interviews. And they would have been part of what I call a cognitive minority. When you are part of a group, whether you intend to join that group or not, whether it's a religious group or any other group that has a belief in some phenomenon that is not widely accepted to be true, but is held by other members of that group to be true. In other words, you're part of a group that has somehow seen something that is not supposed to be, has not been declared real. You are a cognitive minority. Cognitive referring to what you know, and minority referring to you're not in the majority. Well, history is pretty replete with examples of what happens to people who report things that are aberrant. The sort of the main perspective of the culture, the majority very often doesn't welcome news of the universe that doesn't fit the prevailing picture. I mean, if you're deeply religious, if it isn't explained in the Bible, then it is not real. If you're a science follower and it's not yet accounted for by science, then you're going to be dismissed. Unfortunately, science often prides itself on being open to new evidence, but boy, are there many examples going all the way back to Galileo, who had the misfortune of identifying through his computations and through his telescope that the Earth orbits the sun, not the opposite, not the alternative. The sun does not orbit the Earth. That was heretical. He got a knock on the door from the Vatican. Stop saying this. And he rather innocently said, well, you don't have to take my word for it. Come look at my computations over there on the drawing table and look through my telescope. And famously, the Vatican officials, the cardinals in their robes, said, no, we're not looking through your telescope. We're not reading your computation. You must stop saying this or you'll be put under house arrest. He didn't stop, so he was put under house arrest, which doesn't mean he was tortured, but it took a long time. And I think it was sometime in the 1900s, in the 20th century, that the Vatican said, oh, by the way, we were wrong about Galileo. 250 years later.
Yeah, well, a little late, I guess, than never, right? Interesting, very, very interesting. And, it kind of piggybacks on a part of the book that I read, and I thought it was really interesting because we're talking about the witnesses, the people that have these experiences with, UFOs and things of that nature. You had a profound near-death experience when you were in your 20s. And it kind of led into this whole, belief that it's very similar to those people who have those, circumstances where they're, a witness to a UFO phenomenon where this disbelief comes in, you know what I mean? So can you piggyback on that and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I will, and I'll begin by saying I've wrestled with whether I should even bring it into the book because it is not what people expect to read in a book about the UFO phenomenon. The near-death phenomenon, it seems like a related mystery, but it is related. That's the point, and in particular because people, until the near-death experience began to become more widely known, and the stages were made famous through the book by Raymond Moody called Life After Life. There's a tunnel when someone leaves their body and goes through a tunnel, has a life review process, all of which happened to me. I was in my 20s. It was a near drowning. I was off the coast of Hawaii, body surfing with friends, got carried away by waves, very, very big waves, and deep rip tides, which pulled me very far out. And there came a point when I felt myself rising. I'd just been crashed to the ocean floor by one of the big waves. And I felt myself rising, and I said, I'm going to die. And I felt myself rising. Well, what I did not realize was that I was rising out of my body. I left my body. Had no knowledge of what is called the out-of-body experience, an out-of-body experience. Never heard of such a thing. So I was not predisposed, I'm having an out-of-body experience, or I'm having a near-death experience, because I want to remind you, the near-death experience was not on the map yet. Oprah had not done TV shows. Jerry Springer hadn't done TV shows about people who come back from near-death. Yeah. So the books hadn't been written. So here I was, rising out of my body, watching my body, and which is a quite surreal moment when you realize, well, that's who I thought I was. Now I'm seeing that in the same sense that I'm seeing my friends on the shore. And the significant thing, in addition to having an experience of going through a tunnel, having a very profound life review or reliving of my life with a deep sense of broad perspective and understanding of deep patterns far beyond my 28 years of life. And I came back. I didn't have that moment that many near-death people have when they're told by the wisdom figure that it's not your time. I simply came back, was in a cove, had been washed into a cove, had survived. I found my friends rushing out, pulling me up to my feet and helping me get out. One of the key things about this experience was I saw my friends when I was out of my body with a strong sense. I remember a moment, it's still as clear as a bell. I thought to myself, the sense of I was still here, very much here, but it was a panoramic sense of almost a limitless awareness. I was one with the witness of the entire universe, if you might want to say. And I said, oh, dead isn't dead. I'm dead, but I'm not dead. Life doesn't end. Very strong existential sense that was true. So I heard my friend Mary on the shore with another friend of ours named Moore. A bunch of us were all there together. And she was saying, why didn't Keith listen? I told him that he was going out too far. I told him be careful. I told him it was dangerous. Why didn't he listen? Why didn't he listen? So I told Mary, if you will, as I went to her and said, I'm okay, as an energy field, if you will. Well, she didn't hear me. I said, oh, I guess when you are dead, if I am dead, I can hear them. They can't hear me. It reinforced my sense that I was in the larger frame that we call death, or after death, life after life. And I said, I did say to my friend, I said to Mary, it's all okay. I'm okay. You're okay. This is not the way we think it is. It's just, but she couldn't hear me. So when I survived and was taken, back onto shore and with cuts and scrapes, and the next day, after I'd had a night to, recuperate and probably had a hot bath, I don't recall, I said to Mary, could we go for a walk? She said, yeah. And she was very willing to talk with me. I said, I heard what you said on the beach yesterday. She goes, what do you mean? Why didn't he listen? Why did he go out? I told him it wasn't safe. I quoted all this back to her. I watched the blood drain from her forehead down to her chin. I've watched her face go blank. I understood why. We were both in our 20s. Neither of us were philosophers. We weren't students of the nature of consciousness. But we both knew that I could not have heard something that she was saying with the same tone of voice, the same volume of sound that I'm talking with you right now. That's the tone she was using to tell our friend Moore, why didn't Keith listen? She was anguished, but she wasn't shouting. Well, Keith, the body that she was worried about, was 100 or more yards out and struggling against crashing waves. I could not have heard that if I were not out of my body. That's what we both understood. And so we both knew that for that to be true, then this game of reality must be composed. The game board of reality must be different than we know. And we talked for the rest of her life. She died several years later with a health problem, and I was with her a day or two before she passed away. But we continued to have conversations about this. So what's it got to do with the UFO phenomenon? Well, people report beings in these craft. They report interactions called abductions, being taken by these beings, very often with bright light involved, blinding light that is beyond their ability to describe, and surreal. And the near-death experience also has light, a field of light, and beings that are not exactly of this realm. I know I saw, without any expectation or preparation, with no religious orientation, my family was not a devoutly religious family, I encountered in my near-death experience deceased family members and friends, including somebody that I did not know at the time had died. After this was all over, I asked, and totally unrelated to the experience, when it was resolved for me, I one day asked my mother, "How is Uncle Sam?" She said, "Oh, he died." The reason I asked is because I saw Uncle Sam as a spirit form with other relatives. I asked, "When did he die?" 4 months before my near-death experience.
Wow.
I had not told my mother about my near-death experience because it would have freaked her out, and it would have resulted in, all of those kind of hard conversations and probably efforts to talk me out of it. Which, by the way, is the reason I put this in the book, was because there's an analogy, there's a likeness to what UFO witnesses experience, which is disbelief, scoffing. You'll come to your senses. It couldn't have been that. It must have been a hallucination. That dismissal, again, because you're a cognitive minority, you're reporting something that isn't seen. Well, so it goes back to your previous question. Why are people seeing it more? Because the stigma is lessening. Back in 2017, the New York Times ran with a story on the front page about a secret, up to then, government Pentagon task force that was exploring UFOs. They called them unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP, and the phenomenon that had been routinely dismissed and ridiculed, and the witnesses had been ridiculed for decades. Oh, by the way, we are studying it. It is real. There are cases we can't explain. There are unidentified flying objects. We now call them unidentified aerial phenomena, or now they're called unidentified anomalous phenomena. So, but that's, by the way, that's one of the big issues. I don't deal with it deeply, but I do deal with, I don't deal with it comprehensively, but I do touch on the disconnect that happens when the government just continuously says, it's not happening. Go home, people. Go home to your little lives. In case after case, it didn't happen. It was a mistake, a misidentification. People saw Mars and they thought it was, no. There are misidentifications. So the amount of deception that is associated with this phenomenon, I have come to realize I can't sort it out. You can't get to what is true versus not true, but you can attempt to identify in the midst of this jamming. I call it like a jamming. And that response on the part of the agents of official culture, including the scientists, they're the ones I think who are most in default, because they are the ones who should be curious, open, but instead they respond the way the Vatican responded to Galileo. Yep. So ironically today, the religious figures who were the debunkers, well, today they're the science figures who are the debunkers.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it's the same impulse to dismiss what is not understood. Yeah. And I'm just simply trying to bring it more into view as an unknown, but a real phenomenon.
Yeah. I think it was last year or early this year that they had, Air Force officer David Grush come out and talk about all this, evidence and things that he's talked about and interviews that he's done with other officials inside, the Air Force. And then he was ridiculed after, it was like he was burned at the stake, and then you just didn't hear any more about it, and it was just swept under the carpet. What's your whole take on that whole thing? Do you think that was done on purpose? Do you think he was a plant? Is this something that, maybe came out of left field and they were just trying to play damage control? What's your whole take on that whole thing?
Well, let me say, my book is not a great source on that particular story because it was unfolding in real time while my book was being finished. So I did refer to it in the close.
Yes,
but
did.
Here's what's interesting about David Grush. He has a very good background in military intelligence, and he had begun to ask questions. He was interested in the UFO phenomena. He began to pursue the idea that there might be recovered craft and recovered what he called biologics. Interesting term. Refers to biological specimens of the pilots. The members of the crew of these events, of these craft. So he went right up to the water's edge, talked with people. He claimed, when I say he claimed, he brought forward allegations. I have talked with people who are credible, who want to come forward. They are working on reverse engineering these craft, and they want to come forward, but they are prohibited by the classification systems they're under, and they'll go to jail if they... So anyway, that was what he said. He delivered to the Inspector General of the intelligence community, which is a position that each department of the government has somebody in the department who's considered a fair broker. You can go to the inspector general with information of a whistleblower kind. So at this point, the whistleblower's claims, including David Grush's information, names, dates, and locations, ostensibly, of these recovered craft that are being back engineered to try to get to the secrets of how they work, are in the hands of the Inspector General, and I don't really know where it's going to go from here. There's a new book out now by Luis Elizondo, as you probably know, called Imminent, which is number one on the New York Times bestseller list as of this week. So it's bringing this topic into fuller awareness. He too is a disclosure advocate, but he also stops in the same place that Grush stops. That is to say that Elizondo would say in the book, numerous places, I have seen this for myself, or I've heard about photographs, high-resolution photographs of craft. Have you seen them yourself? I can't comment. I can't comment. I can't comment. Now, the debunkers, or even just honest skeptics, say, isn't it convenient? They can always never comment. Well, I don't know how convenient it is. Look, that's not to say that I'm not a debunker. I'm neither a believer nor disbeliever in what they're claiming to have seen, but they are making a plausible claims of evidence that are empirical. But going back to your question about Grush, within a short period of him coming out with these details, he apparently had a period in his past. He suffered PTSD as a result of the combat he had seen. So guess what? Somebody went into his medical file, who should not have had access to his medical file, and released to the public that he had had psychiatric problems, that he and his wife had been on the verge of divorce, etc. Well, not uncommon in PTSD cases. These are profoundly unsettling, and veterans in particular very often have unresolved issues. So it was listen, it's a good example of the difficulty that witnesses face. So who was doing that? Well, if there is contraband of this kind, if there are recovered craft, and I understand both sides of the argument. I mean, for example, one of the major arguments is, how could a conspiracy of this scope be maintained? And there's something to be said for that at a common sense level.
Absolutely.
Most conspiracies break at some point. Although the critic would say, how do you know most break? Many break. The Watergate political corruption case in the Nixon administration, that broke. Didn't break easily. It took a lot of gumshoe reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, a lot of work on the part of those reporters to break the Watergate story that led to President Nixon's resignation. So how do you know how many conspiracies? We still don't have the full answer about the John F. Kennedy assassination. We're told that when Trump was being asked to release it, his Secretary of Defense, maybe CIA, Mike Pompeo, came to Trump. This is what Robert Kennedy has said recently. I don't want to get off into parallel conspiracies, but Robert Kennedy Jr. has said that Trump told him that when Pompeo had come to Trump, said, Mr. President, do not release this. The country is not ready for it. Well, I don't know what that means. Why is the country not ready? In any case, this is a very highly classified field. It's closely related to the classification of our atomic secrets, because 1947 was the beginning of the nuclear age, around the time of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that side of things, I'm not an expert on. I'm not a disclosure expert, but it's really in the news right now.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting, and another aspect of this whole thing, and this is a part of what you talk about in the book. It's called toxic skepticism, and I found that very interesting. Could you elaborate further on that?
Yeah, I call toxic. First of all, as I said myself, I'm a skeptic.
Yeah.
I'm a skeptic of the claims that there are recovered saucers. Apparently, Grush says there are 12, some of them in pristine condition. Well, does that mean they were traded? Were they left? Really, were they left to be found in order to advance? Were the intelligence that left them, Was there a strategy on their part to leave these behind? How could the craft be in pristine condition? Okay, so that's a question. I'm a skeptic. I'm not a debunker. The debunker says, rules it off the table automatically, rules it out of bounds, very often in the name of science. So I call that a response, not genuine skepticism. Genuine skepticism says, remarkable claim. Sir, what is your evidence? Could I look at it? You say you have a document. May I review it? You find out whether the document is likely to be real, genuine, or a fraud. There are cases where elaborate frauds, hoaxes are done with documents to mislead people into believing something is the case. So the intelligence game, disinformation depends on, there's usually a kernel of fact or truth surrounded by layers of falsehood. So the very fact that there is an element that is plausible and true leads people on, leads people into the belief system that the disinformation agents are trying to culminate, trying to foster. So with that in mind, to take it back a few steps, the toxic skepticism is the automatic dismissal, scoffing, that didn't happen because it couldn't happen. You didn't get abducted by aliens because people don't get abducted by aliens. That it essentially comes down to that. Not every skeptic is a toxic skeptic, but there is a toxic skepticism that prevents inquiry. And that's what I mean by trying to out that particular phenomenon.
Yeah, it's an important part because I think it really does hinder a lot of the progress when it comes to disclosure or even learning more about that. And piggybacking on that subject, what do you think the future of UFO research is going at this point? I mean, do you see the future, going at a more methodical or more technological way? What do you feel?
Well, short of prophecy, which I'm not going to try to, but what do I think are the trends? What's happening now is that the David Grush claims are in the hands of the Inspector General. There are said to be, the New York Times reporter who just did a review of his book is out by saying she has talked, Leslie Kane of the New York Times has reported that she has talked with whistleblowers herself, and they want to come forward with this evidence about the secret they're called the legacy programs. That means they have long-term standing. Right. The legacy program, there's a legacy. They've been there for a while. So they've been working on these reverse engineering of these craft for decades. It would suggest, if that's actually happening, and they are really what they are said to be, that the nature of the material must be just impenetrable.
Yeah.
So there's currently a line of investigation around disclosure. Mm-hmm. I'm not so confident that it's about to happen anytime soon. Disclosure. One of the things I talk about in the book, and I think because I've been around this since I was in the 12th grade, the 6th grade, since I was 12 years old in the 6th grade, I came to realize that this idea, any day now, the lid on the government cover-up is going to blow sky high.
Yeah, any day.
It's been going on for decades. Mm-hmm. And if you're just come to this phenomenon 7 years ago with the 2017 New York Times article, if you're, say, a Gen Z who's new to this, says, oh, wow, they found out the Pentagon has been in on it, and that's been disclosed, and Lou Elizondo's book is out. It must mean we're on the verge of definitive disclosure. Well, I can tell you, at minimum, what's going on with the disclosure thing is that look, we don't know, there's no way to know for sure what kinds of projects are being worked on in black operations, in off-budget. There may be pushback to David Grush's claims from legitimate people in our military intelligence establishment who say, this has nothing to do with UFOs. These projects are related to our own intelligence, methods and sources, and our own advanced craft. Do not make us reveal this. Well, the UFO field says, oh, you're calling it. U.S. craft. You don't want it to be revealed. So there's going to be pushback to the efforts to get disclosure. There's going to be pushback, whether it's because legitimate assets of American defense might be compromised, or because they're getting too close to the truth on UFOs. Either way, there's going to be pushback. So I think there's going to be continued efforts to get disclosure, what people call disclosure, definitive facts. We have the crash saucer and so forth. I think there's another whole other aspect of this that's going to continue to evolve. And that's the kind of stuff I deal with in my book, that at the level of experience, the UFO phenomenon is part of a larger framework in general. It includes the near-death experience. It includes paranormal phenomena, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis. It all sounds very fantastical to the uninitiated, but I can tell you that the evidence, I say this not based on belief. As I say, I'm a skeptic myself. I'm from the Midwest, okay? I don't take things on faith. And I have investigated the evidence of scientific research into the paranormal. And in particular, listeners who may not be familiar, I would simply cite one name and one organization. Dr. Dean Radin, R-A-D-I-N, PhD, at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Northern California. Dean Radin is all you need. Do a search. He has done very sophisticated laboratory research. Not only Dean Radin, but the evidence is solid that paranormal phenomena exist, and many aspects of UFO sightings are paranormal in this sense. An apparent craft comes in. It is picked up on radar and other sensors. It is picked up by eyesight, ordinary people and military observers. They leave ground indentations. They have a thermal signature, significant with some form of energy. They have a place in geometrically located, consistent with an object in space. In other words, talking about something that by all appearances is an object, an apparent craft. And then that apparent craft will break into multiple craft, orbs of light that are translucent, floating, and then some of them will descend into the ground. One of the craft will go off in that direction. One descends into the ground or goes in another direction. So we have a phenomenon that materializes and meets the criteria of matter and then dematerializes. Suddenly,
that's
like
that's
a
something you
poltergeist.
actually mentioned in the book. That's let me go back to my notes here, if you don't mind. And
Sure.
It was where. Let's see here. Give me 1 second. It was a
Skinwalker Ranch?
not Skinwalker Ranch. It was a quote by someone saying that UFOs were basically particles that come apart to come back together again.
Well, yeah, it was John Keel, a researcher in the 1960s, Keel, long gone, but his books are still available. Operation Trojan Horse. He started out as an extraterrestrial hypothesis guy. He believed that was going to explain it. But he began to see there are parallels between these phenomena and occult phenomena and mystical and paranormal, paraphysical. He would call these paraphysical, that in the same realm as spirits. Okay, we're talking. He made the connection that we really need to be studying this in the same sense that we should be studying the phenomena of seances, materializations, the dead. So look, when you take that kind of framework, you get a much bigger mystery. And in that sense, I don't think the UFO phenomenon is going to be completely intelligible until we can expand our paradigm of science to include phenomena that are able to cross the bridge between matter and mind. That's what Carl Jung called a synchronicity. Those moments in our lives, I have a whole chapter called Who Do We Think We Are, in which I actually talk about our own human capacities for paranormal abilities. I happen to believe that while there may be some particularly gifted people called psychics, they have human capacities that are actually widespread, but they're not developed. Who ever got instruction in grade school on how to bend spoons? I'm not suggesting we should, but if children were, well, if we were educated about our capacities in these realms, we might have more mastery over these kinds of phenomena. That experience you might have when you've been thinking about an old friend from high school. I'll call him John. And it's been a long time. It's one day the phone rings. You've been thinking about John for a few days, and I'm going to get in touch with my old friend John. You pick up the phone, and the voice said, "Hey, Keith, you won't believe it. It's me, John, from high school. Been thinking about you the last few days." And you sit there, you raise your jaw back up from the floor because it's a jaw-dropping experience. You go, "Hello, John. Yeah. Nice to talk to you. You may tell John, you may not tell John. What you want to tell John, I've been thinking about you too, and now you call." And that's technically nothing other than a coincidence in materialist science, because minds don't communicate with minds, but there's massive evidence that they do. Even the placebo experience, which is quite a thing. Real briefly, experimenting on a painkiller, there's an experimental group and a control group. It's both groups know that some members of the group are going to get the real medicine and some are not going to get the real medicine. They're going to get a dummy pill. And not only do they not know who's going to get what, even the researchers don't know who gets what. They don't want to contaminate the findings. Correct. There's a significant regular percentage, far higher than statistical norms, that show the people who got the dummy pill, that's able to find out who did get it, got as good results as if they had been on the medication, pain relief, and they get the same side effects. They're able to produce, based on the belief that they got the medication, they're able to produce the nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, whatever the problem, whatever the side effects are, rapid heartbeat. We all hear those drug commercials on TV. Of course. 60 seconds, and 45 seconds of the commercial is devoted to the side effects, right, including the light.
The first 10 seconds is talking about what you can take care of, and then the last 45 seconds is all the stuff that's happening to you after that, yeah.
Oh, that's right. After they tell you how good it is, then say, "Oh, you may die. Be prepared to die." So anyway, the thing about the placebo is you can't kind of trick them. The placebo is the trick on you. It is based on a trick. Namely, you don't know. I often would say, "Well, gee, I wish we could. How would we learn to channel the placebo effect?" Yeah, the power, the ability to heal ourselves is essentially what I'm talking about. Yeah. So these are profound mysteries that our paradigm of science has not been open to. And so I'm a kind of an unusual author on this subject. I make a connection between the UFO lore and these larger issues of a greater sense of reality.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Speaking of which, you putting this book together, has this changed your overall perspective on this whole phenomena? I ask people that write about, things of this nature all the time. And this question comes up all the time because I always like to ask, because the answer surprises me more than usual. And I wanted to ask you, has it changed your perspective at all? Or has it cemented your beliefs?
Well, if you mean this larger, yes, my own near-death experience, which I wasn't going to bring into the book because I thought, well, it's not directly relevant, but in another sense, it is relevant because I'm describing a larger set of phenomena that in which there's Venn diagram. Here's the UFO circle. Here's the near-death phenomenon. Oh, look, there's a common overlapping part of the two circles. Add the whole realm of paranormal phenomena, telepathy, clairvoyance. Very often in the UFO phenomena, here's a good case. It was a particular witness in the Hudson Valley, New York sightings of the 1980s. Driving along, saw an apparent craft and watched it for 20 minutes and was transfixed. And he later said that during that 20-minute period when he was watching this craft in the sky, far away, he engaged in a complete review of his life, a life process in which he went very deeply inside to recall, to relive his entire life. That's similar to the near-death experience, the life review process. So, yes, as based on my own experience of near-death and also studying other near-death experiences and mystical experiences in general, those moments when your identity shifts, those moments that of seeing a sunset or at the birth of a child or perhaps it's the death of a loved one, there's a sudden opening, and you realize that this game, this world, this universe is bigger, and there's a sense of purpose and meaning and value. These are rather widespread experiences, peak experiences. So yeah, the UFO phenomenon is not going to be resolved solely by what's discovered in the hangars of McDonnell Douglas. There may be something in those hangars, okay? Yeah. Or Lockheed Martin. I'm not dismissing it. I'm not being dismissive or in any way scoffing. But there are still aspects of this that are paranormal, what we call paranormal, super normal, normal at a larger degree of normalcy, extra normal, meta.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a very thin veil between the paranormal and the UFO, phenomenon. I totally believe that. I think there's no difference between seeing a UFO and a ghost. Really, at the end of the day.
Well, that's now the debunkers have a field day with that. They go, just ghost stories. Yeah. But that's a very good point. These are just, when anybody says that's just a ghost story, it's merely a modern day retelling of the ancient myths that we have already discredited. No, we haven't actually discredited everything. That's not scientific thinking. And sure, science does. There are some things that can be debunked. And it's always an advance for knowledge when we can take something off the table. Mm-hmm. I don't want to believe anything that isn't true. For example, after my near-death experience, when everybody, when I came back literally came back onto shore, and my friends were helping me to my feet, and one of them said, "Keith, you've obviously survived. We thought you'd given it up out there." Mm-hmm. Referring to me we thought you weren't going to come back. Yeah. And I said, "Oh, you understand." I actually said, I was very lucid. I said, I did. I did give it up. I went to the realm of, it was stuttering and stammering, mm-hmm. but because I was still trying to process it, I went to an afterlife. I knew that was dying. I believe what happened is I was in the outskirts of dying. The dying process had begun. Leaving the body, I think, is stage one. In any case, the feedback I got from my friends, from the looks on their faces, because they knew nothing about the near-death experience, was not on the table yet, was that I was probably delusional, and that I would need to settle down, get some help, and get therapy. So I learned to keep this to myself. So I wanted to write in this book. I decided to bring that story into the book, because I wanted to help witnesses who read this. There are people who read my book and may say, "Wow, I feel that I probably should find somebody to talk with about my experience." Not necessarily tell the whole community. Mm-hmm. Don't go on the local radio station or give an interview to the newspaper, because unless you're willing to be a public figure around this stuff, you'll get a lot of push. But tell somebody that you love, a family member, a brother or sister, maybe a pastor, religious person, mm-hmm. A psychologist, a good psychologist who is not judgmental. Unburden yourself to make this real in your life in some way. And as far as the rest of the society believing, let that take care of itself.
Yeah, I totally agree. In closing, Keith, the impact of, this book, what do you think as far as, the ongoing conversations about UFOs, when it comes to your book, what do you think your impact of this book is going to do?
Well, I'm hoping what it'll do is what I've just touched on, is that give more people permission. I really emphasize the experiential part of this, the witnesses. I believe the witnesses are the clue. When people, I'm often asked, sometimes the first question, sometimes by a reviewer or an interviewer who will admit, "Look, I didn't get to read it, so I've got some questions here for you." I said, "Fine. Thanks for telling me you haven't read it." Mm-hmm. They'll say, "Is your book about disclosure?" And I've learned to smile when I get asked that. It's all about disclosure. It's about the phenomenon disclosing itself in the lives of witnesses at various levels, including these strange, we didn't get into this deeply, these encounters called abductions where people report being taken and experimented on and then returned. So the entire phenomenon is a disclosure. Now, is my book specifically about the government disclosure stuff? No. But the larger issue is that it's all about disclosure. So I think the book that is now out by Lou Elizondo called Imminent, which I haven't read yet. I'm kind of taking a break from other people's books. I don't want to read anything about this subject. Yeah. But I think his book is likely to open up ground for a continuing larger conversation. That's what I'm looking for.
Wonderful. Of course, everybody can go to your website, thompsonatlarge.com. That's correct?
That's correct. Thompson with a P. At that website, the book can be gotten at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. The book is out as a print book, an ebook, and also as an audiobook.
Awesome. Very good. Keith, what's next on the horizon for you after this? Are you taking a break? What's the next project?
As a writer, I'm going to continue writing about these themes. I haven't narrowed it yet, but I feel like it'll be beyond the UFO phenomenon. Further investigations about the nature of reality, and in particular the question of consciousness. It does not seem that consciousness is produced by the brain. The brain channels consciousness, receives it, permits it, but there are increasing, especially in the near-death phenomenon, when someone comes back from surgery and the doctor says, now that you're back, I will tell you your prognosis. And the patient will groggily say, I already know the prognosis, doctor. I overheard you tell Dr. Smith in the other wing of the hospital about 2 hours ago. And you were having spaghetti, and that's what's on your tie, which by the way, that's a real story. Near death doctors who had no belief, no preparation for these reports. People leave their body during surgery. They die, or they come close to dying. They go to heavenly, celestial type places, and they have paranormal. They overhear the doctor talking in another wing of the hospital, which is not possible. That's the part that interests me. The nature of consciousness. Who are we? Ultimately, the larger question: what does it mean to be a human being, and what are our capacities, our potentials?
Unbelievable. Wow. Well, Keith, thank you so much for coming on the podcast tonight. And of course, I implore everybody to go check out the book, The UFO Paradox. You can check it out on Amazon, or I'm sure there's links right at his website, thompsonatlarge.com. Again, thank you so much, Keith Thompson, for coming on Dark Fringe Radio.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Keith.